Good to go.
Yeah, good to go.
Peter, great to see you. Thanks for taking the time. It's really a pleasure to have you. Now, scaling access management in 2026 is a big thing for companies, specifically for fast-moving growth companies. That's really an interesting learning that we made in the last weeks and months. That more and more companies really understand that access management is not only a practice kind of to say no, and IT and security controls things, but that it's really something that enables a company's growth. Still, many companies, when they reach a certain size, understand and realize that their initial old school access management approaches break. Why do so many approaches break when companies start growing?
So hello, Johannes. It is nice to be here, as always. And just to answer your question, so as companies scale, models break because access is created everywhere, right? Across more application, more teams, more automation, and more privileged paths created, while the governance, the process stays manual and centralized. And these are the fundamental keys. When ticket-driven approvals turn into queues, exception becomes permanent, and standing privilege accumulates, which increases breach plus radius and makes audit evidence hard to produce.
It's super interesting what you're saying. So, and I can only agree to that. It's almost a um, it's almost a contradiction in the sort of setup that many companies have, right? As a matter of fact, as you just said, access is created in such a distributed manner. Still, the thinking how to handle it comes through a sort of non-distributed central kind of funnel, and that makes it in the end, at the end of the day, so hard, right?
So absolutely. So the centralization becomes a problem here because the person or individuals or departments or relevant teams who's approving these relevant privileges. They are far from the business where the needs is generated, and that just needs to be aligned. So the hybrid function is useful when providing a decentralized need must have. Why is it? So all of the information why that privilege should be provided, but the policy is centralized and governed by the relevant team providing those privileges.
Yeah. And before we go into more detail how to set that up, and I know you built a really neat process at Nudge. So does that mean at the end of the day that the only way to sort of implement that in a fully functional and efficient manner these days is almost to accept a paradigm shift that the role of IT and security is not to approve everything in a centralized manner, but to enable and orchestrate a distributed setup? Would you go that far?
So I think absolutely, right? So it should be looked as an enabler, the privileges when it's distributed within the organization, not a roadblock and a bottleneck. Because as soon as become that point that you introduce a very rigid process for approvals, it will just become, I think the term is rubber stamping, when everything is just gets approved, just to get it done, just to make sure that the relevant people have all the access what they need to carry out their activities. And that usually leads to a privilege creep and all of the access what you provide is going to be permanent.
That's such a fascinating thought, and I couldn't agree more to it. So essentially, what you are saying is like if you build a rigid, very rigid, centralized setup, one negative consequence is that many people don't get the access that they need and they will simply bypass the system. And another potential consequence is you just approve everything. You want to comply with all the tickets. You don't even think about it anymore, which essentially also leads to over provisioning, right?
Absolutely. So you are working with a very finite set of resources, especially when you are scaling up. The team which are going to grow is not the team which are managing these privileges and reviewing it and introducing it. So you need to make sure that the resources are allocated in a way which provides an effective and efficient processes that can maintain a level of authority within the organization to revoke, manage access, provide all of the identity and access management.
Now, bearing this in mind, I know you built a really great system internally. So, What are the building blocks? Maybe we can quickly go through the typical identity lifecycle. What are for you the key building blocks and methodologies that you implemented at Nudge in order to facilitate a distributed and fully functional process that doesn't end up in complete over provisioning?
So, so we have a very neat system, right? So we very early when we started looking at that identity and access management and privileged access management, we worked with the people team, the human resources team, to ensure that joiners, leavers, and movers are linked into the process. And whatever we could, we try to automate it with enough manual actions and reviews kept into the process to make sure that privilege creep is not going to happen. So we have a role-based access control with the principle of least privileges. Again, we didn't fully automate it for various reasons. And one of them was to ensure that we have the relevant reviews for privileged account, mostly the PAM. And that's because the organization right now managing a large volume of PII information. And it's very important that those are kept to the need to know basis. And with that, we just hooked it in again with the HR system as much as we could. We providing need to know access, again, least principle of least privileges. And there is a really good example which happened this week, I think yesterday, when the CEO of the organization requested an exception to do some work what he needed to do on his side, and the operator said no. He needs
I
to go
love
to
that.
security to approve it. And I went to that person, line manager, that look, this wouldn't happen everywhere, right? So not everyone would say no to the CEO who is also the co-founder. So I think that was brilliant place to put in the centralization of the policy and the governance, that regardless of the seniority, you shouldn't bypass the authentication process, the life cycle. Um, and yeah, it's pretty good. So what we put in place again with the most important is part of the joiners. So when they are joined, is that the most important part? It is an important part, right? So when they join, the roles shouldn't be treated as a bucket list that okay, this person will do everything, which happens a lot, especially with scaling up organization, that whenever they finally got the budget to hire someone, yes, that person will do everything, right? So that person needs all of the access and authentication and authorization within the platform, what we can give him or her. So I think it's important to iron out the roles and responsibilities and hook it up with the right granularity of authentication or authorization of the relevant applications.
That's super interesting. Let's get back to that flow that you start together with the HR team, which I think is a very smart thing and efficient thing to do, and speak about role-based access in a second. I do have to come back to the example that you just made with your CEO. I think that's a beautiful example, really, of what least privilege means. Yeah, it doesn't matter if you're the CEO of the company or the founder of the company. If a certain request for a privileged access that you have is not in line with your policies, then the response is no. I would take that example and distribute it across your entire organization as like, look, everyone, this is what we mean with least privilege.
So we will give we again we are thinking about how to make the best, just to take this opportunity to make this widespread that look, this has happened and this person is at the highest level of the organization, and the person who revoked that request, it's not necessarily a senior, and it's a beautiful things when the policy and the processes work. And that again, I highly agree, that's just a great example. Yeah, it's rare that I'm very, very proud of some of the activities happening under the policies, because they are policies, right? So they're not the most exciting things, but the fact that they are working and it's applied at the BAU basis, I'm super happy.
Now, I'm super curious. How did your CEO react? Was he like, "Wow, guys, I'm proud of you. This is a proper security posture," or was he kind of pissed off?
Neither. So I think neither. That we think we are still relative. We are a medium-sized organization, right? So everyone knows everyone, and and I'm very, very grateful that the senior leadership who I work with, they are very security minded person and privacy minded person. So they know the type of data we deal with. They know that the type of clients we offering our services and know the level of security and privacy which needs to be applied at all levels. So he was like, yeah, absolutely right. Go to security, go to the right channels, request the right access. That has been reviewed, logged, approved for a time period, the TTL, 24 hours, do what you need to do, and then it's revoked.
Super interesting. Like this also reminds me, it's something that we see across all our customers that next to a great process, explaining the why to your organization and also having senior leadership kind of being a role model when it comes to these things and sticking to the process is a super important enabling factor. Cool. Peter, a moment ago, and I want to get back to that. You spoke about how you start your identity lifecycle, obviously from your HR system, probably, and then there's a signal into your IAM stack. And I know you're for various reasons a big fan of role-based access. I know when we spoke in previous conversations, you said like it's a super clear cut, yeah, and that essentially makes it very efficient, yeah, because it takes away the ambiguity. Maybe you can once more share your thinking why role-based access is for you such an important sort of foundation of your access management system.
So the way I'm looking at it, that role-based access control, it's a as you mentioned, it's a clear cut. It's black or white. Either you have authentication rights or not, authorization rights or not, depending of the granularity you are looking at. And it's very, very simple. It's not complex. There are not a lot of variables to manage. And therefore, because it's simple, it's effective, you get the job done. You will get the right level of authorization within the application where you get the authentication. And it's efficient because you can do it, you can review it relatively easily if you need to. So if you tie the four aspect of the identity management, so the identity authentication, authorization, and the audit logging, so the non-repudiation into the board, the role-based access control just ticks all the boxes because you know exactly that that role associated with how many people, who are those employees, what they have access to, what level they have access to within that application, and what they actually did with the logging. So it's just it becomes very, very transparent that what people can do at what level.
Yeah, I agree. So to quickly summarize, what I've heard so far is you're a big believer in sort of distributed approaches when it comes to access management versus just a super centralized one. IT needs to enable everyone to contribute to this. People in the teams and departments have the context and the knowledge if a certain access is needed or not. That was your first point. Second point you made was a very good level of automation starting really from your HR system, but with certain human sort of interventions. That was the second piece, and then a role-based access control system almost as your foundation. Now we've spoken a lot about human access, and I know you're going for a AI governance certification right now. What's your perspective on the next big frontier in identity, which is agentic access? Who gives Cursor access permission to access your GitHub or your GitLab? What's your perspective on that? Is this a hype topic on social media these days, or is it really already a fundamental security concern?
So I think it depends of the organization, right? So we are not at that state when we start thinking about introducing agentic access control for agentic agents. I think it's a very exciting area, everything what's happening with AI. So we do integrated an AI solution within the services we offer for customers, and therefore we are going for the ISO 42001, the AI management system certification as a company. Um, mm, just hooking it back into the identity, that would be a privilege access management most likely. It's just an interesting for us. it's still an interesting, let's see what's happening within the business and what are the pitfalls. So this is a completely new area when it's mass integrated, because this happened before, right? This is not something which just came up, but now it's available for organization to integrate it on a scale, right? And that's where it comes complex, and that's what you want to avoid when you are thinking about identity and access management. When it's come to that, when we're gonna cross that bridge, right now, what I can say that we're gonna treat it with the same scrutiny as the role-based access control, defining it, the roles, the entitlements, the approvals, and the lifecycle is enforcement for the same level as we would do that with a privileged authenticator employee.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you said earlier, specifically when it comes to your infrastructure access, your PAM, obviously the least privilege is of utmost importance. Yeah. So if someone in your engineering team wants to introduce some dev AI agent that has autonomous long-standing permissions. I mean, this is at the end of the day, from an access perspective, even more sensitive than the access of an engineer, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Absolutely. Because you are introducing most likely some vendors as well into the access management who has access to. Therefore, you're increasing your security vulnerability posture, the attack surface much wider than your own organization. And that just gives more surface for attacks, right? And breach. So depending on what you are sharing with that agentic agent, you can just tenfold the potential breach what you could introduce with an individual employee within your organization.
Yeah, there are like tons of very interesting and fascinating questions. Another thought that we spoke about the other day with a customer is like, um, there's the dimension of the agent that gets access to something, in most cases, standing access, not even dynamic. And then in many cases, there are multiple humans that have access to that agent. So the agent actually increases the human access to a system as well.
Yes, that's absolutely a factor. That's absolutely a factor. So, and the way we are combating that right now, because most of the engineers who I work with, they are brilliant, right? And they very clever in a way that whatever they can, they want to automate within the manual task, within their BAU work. So very early working with the senior leadership team within the tech space, we introduced some AI policies and just some approval processes. We have an AI incubator. Whenever you're thinking about AI, you can go into that specific area and request approval and founds for it. So if there is a legitimate business case for it to make it efficient, a more efficient process, or just eliminate some of the additional resource overhead, that the company will look at it as an investment, and you don't need to pay for it. You will get some extra time to work on that.
Excellent. You already mentioned new certifications that you're going for. So the governance piece, obviously, next to the automation is a big one. And in an ideal setup, in my perspective, you are able to sort of facilitate a company's growth, providing the access to your users that they need, but only the access they need. And at the same time, you have access control evidence almost in real time for your next audit, because otherwise, sort of collecting that evidence is an incredibly cumbersome job to get done. How have you structured that? How do you sort of make sure that you're not only running a smooth process, but that you also have access control evidence for any audits?
So in an ideal world, the audit readiness, it's a byproduct of efficient operations, right? Most cases, that's not the case, because usually that's not integrated into the processes at the design phase. And what we try to do, and we didn't manage to think everything at the beginning, but what we try to do retrospectively to make sure that we are tying up all of the circles, and the audit preparation doesn't becomes a fire drill, but is a BAU just for checking that everything is there, making sure that we are ticking all of the boxes and complying with the relevant standard framework or regulation, is we going through the relevant documentations and logs, and especially scaling up organization don't necessarily like to hear the word standardization, but that's where it all starts. You cannot effectively and efficiently scale something that is not standardized. And once it is standardized, you look at the effectiveness. Obviously, that's why you are standardizing it, because it works. But as you start scaling it up, you look at the efficiency and you just stream up whatever waste you don't want within that process by making sure that information like which is audit ready, like who requested it, who approved it, why it was granted, what exactly was granted, how long is last, and when was the last time reviewed. That's all captured within a space. And that usually, if you are, it depends on what kind of solutions you have access to. If you are using a dedicated tool, that's great, that will capture all of this for you. If you are not using a dedicated solution, you still have the ability to factor that in, because usually whatever you are using, whatever ticketing system you are using, you have the capability to configure it to a certain degree.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Um, yeah, to summarize that, maybe a few questions and give me your sort of super top-down answers. For fast-growing tech companies, Peter, if you were to join a new company next month and there's not a proper process, what are the top three things that a company needs to implement to get going with the access management approach?
So the first I would do is just do a gap analysis against the gold standard, the North Star. But role-based access control, role-based access control, linking it up with the HR process, so joiners, movers, and leavers, to make sure that those are definitely applied whenever authentication request comes through. And the third one would be a top-down approach, making sure that there is a buy-in for senior leaders of the organization to implement it. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
What's your response if your CEO says, fuck that process, sorry for the French, I requested access, I want access to that?
So I'm the typical example of a difficult security person. I would just say that's the process. That's just the way it is. And yeah, thankfully, I don't have to endure that kind of attitude and language from the senior leaders of the company I work for. But that could happen. If that happens, my recommendation is just persevere. So ultimately, it will pay off for you, because those people at the top will see the relevance when you guys are gonna miss a breach. You guys gonna make sure that the audit readiness is ready, because that's when it comes to importance of what you do within their eyes, because security and privacy is a non-functional requirement, right? You cannot directly sell that to clients. But when it comes to certification, to provide assurance internally and externally that you comply with best practices, that's something which is tangible. That's something which can be relating to a direct sale, into an upsale, into a continuation of the relationship between the customer. So just persevere, say that I'm very sorry that this is how you feel. This is the process what we put in place. You sign the policy. This is the objective what we try to achieve. That's why it happened. That's just the way it is. If you have a different feeling, we can redo the process if you like. So it's a give or take. You cannot just go head against the one of the top um, one of the co-founder, the CEO, one of the C-level within the organization, because regardless of what you do, how you do it, that's not going to end up well for you. It's a give or take. Explain why this has been put in place. Provide some assurance that this is working towards, not against the company, and just try to move that forward.
I love that answer. Um, if you think about where the world and the workforce is going in 2026, bearing in mind that fast companies are saying their agentic workforce is larger than their actual human workforce, what keeps you up at night? What's more sensitive in 2026 from a security and from an access perspective? Human access or non-human agentic access?
Non-human agentic.
Because
Because there are more variables, right? So it's much more complex. As discussed, you're just increasing your attack surface by opening up with external factors. Because most of the time when you are applying agentic AI access into your environment. That's not something that developed in-house. That's something what you purchase, what you get off the shelf, maybe customize a little bit and integrate it into your environment behind all of the security layers what you put in place. So you're basically opening up a door to invite additional security threats and vulnerabilities, and managing that at this stage, I think is just difficult because the AI space right now is just so volatile that the things are changing so fast, and adding that additional complexity and variables into your identity and access management processes, I would say that keeps me up night if something that is
And
the unknown.
coming back to your other example, the agent doesn't care about the policy that it might have signed, yeah, as your CEO. It essentially it might just go off.
Exactly. So yeah, and this is it. So it's just the scale of things, the way it happens, that now few click of a buttons you can set up an AI agent. You can hook up an AI solution within your environment. Maybe behind those DMZs or those firewalls, those segmented networks, what you try to protect to ensure integrity of those data, you can just easily hook it up. And again, that's you are just opening up different avenue of attack for someone who try to do harm of the organization or just wants to play around. It's just inviting trouble at this stage if it's not managed well. So I'm not saying that it should be just rejected outright, but it has to be considered all of the different areas how it can access um, the data, the relevant resources, what you manage, and the downstream of that, not just that individual agent, but who is the vendor, who works for that vendor, what are the subcontractors. So the complexity increases tenfold.
Yeah, what permissions should that non-human access get? Cool. Last but not least, as we also spoke about compliance, and again, as a super short answer, if a company wants to kind of im- implement a fully compliant access control process, but not just for the sake of having checkmark compliance, but for the sake of actually increasing their security, access security posture. How to make sure that your compliance is not just checkmark compliance, but actually contributes to your security.
So that's when it's called the two factors of the process. If you break it down, the effectiveness and the efficiency. So just to make sure that this is not a checkbox exercise, to make sure that we are ticking all of the boxes, it needs to hook it up for the objectives, that what is the objective of the organization, of the identity and access management, and just hook it into some KPIs which are measurable and can be presented at frequent intervals to the relevant leaders of the organization so they can see the effectiveness and efficiency. That usually when you have data that is tangible, that feeds into the security posture in a way that opinions does not, that I think this will work, I think we should do that, that doesn't cut it when you're trying to sell an idea to the senior leaders.
Peter, thank you so much for your time today. Your CEO can certainly be very, very happy to have such a rigid security person on board. Thank you and
Thank you
speak
so much,
soon.
Johannes. Have a nice one. Bye.